We are thrilled tonight to be joined by Lissa Evans. Now, you might think of Lissa Evans as best-selling author, writer of children's books and adults' books, but actually Lissa started her career on a probably what you might describe a very different path. So she studied medicine at university and worked for a few years as a junior doctor, and as I said, then took quite a different path by taking a job with BBC Radio Light Entertainment. She then turned her attention to television, and she produced and directed successful television series such as Room 101, Kumar's at Number 42, and my personal all-time favourite comedy series, Father Ted, for which she won a BAFTA. Now,
have you got it?
Show it, but it's got jewellery wrapped around it, so I use it as an extra stand.
Brilliant. Oh, fantastic. So in terms of Lissa's writing career, her first book was published in 2002 called Spencer's List. And then since then, she has written 3 books for children. And as a children's librarian, I can highly recommend them. And then she's also written, I should say, 5 more novels for adults, one of which was made into a major feature film called Their Finest, which starred Bill Nighy and Gemma Arterton. So it's quite fitting, really, tonight that Lissa is here talking to us. It's the last day of Women's History Month. And her latest novels, so I'm talking Crooked Heart, Old Baggage, V for Victory, are set before, during and after the Second World War, which was obviously a period of notable change for women in this country. And each of these novels features what you might call memorable, rather strong female characters, of which I'm sure you're going to be talking about tonight. Really, really hope that you enjoy our evening with Lissa. I am now going to pass the baton to Heather and of course Lissa for the main event. So enjoy.
Thank you, Sinead. Let's just wait for the technical wizardry to happen. So clever, all this stuff, isn't it? So, well, hello everybody. I'm Heather, a team librarian with Shropshire Libraries, and I'm really delighted to welcome Lissa to our event with Shropshire Libraries this evening. She's making no charge for her time. She's doing it for the pure love of writing and being an author, and we're so chuffed. Personally, she's one of my favourite writers. And I've loved all her books. So Sinead's given us just a quick overview of your very varied career so far, Lissa. Can you start by telling us how did you come to be writing novels for adults? How did you go from Father Ted to writing novels?
I think writing was underpinned everything. I mean, I grew up in a family where everybody read all the time. You know, it wasn't until I was a teenager that I realised that most families don't read during meals. You know, reading was vastly important, and I think always underpinning everything was the feeling that you could do no better thing than write. And you know, I've got loads of notebooks stretching back to when I was 5 or 6 with stories in and so forth. But I never thought of actually sitting down. And I tried to write a novel in my 20s and ran out of plot. But when I look back at it, it does have a somewhat similar style to what I ended up with. But I think I didn't really start writing until I had something I wanted or needed to write about. I think that's what
really focus.
And that turned into Spencer's List. But that was because there was something I wanted to write about. I had a very close friend who had died, and Spencer's List, in a way, I suppose I would define it as a funny book about grief. I wanted to write about what it was like to lose something, and also to feel stuck in life. Those are the two things. And those both reflected how I felt at the time. So that was what propelled me to actually write. And also the discovery that perhaps I wrote best when I was writing about multiple characters. And that's something I've carried on doing, certainly in the adult books. Yeah.
So you had a couple of early novels, and then you turned to writing for children, and wrote.
Yeah, I did. That was Crooked Heart, my third novel. During that, I slowed to a near halt, and I had an idea for a children's book, and I ended up writing and having published 2 children's books between beginning and ending Crooked Heart. And
they're wonderful books in their own right. Really good adventure stories. So we'll come back to Crooked Heart in a moment. A book I think that really raised your profile early on was Their Finest Hour and a Half, which was written about, it's set during the time of Dunkirk, or just afterwards, wasn't it, when
yes, that's right.
The country needed a big morale boost, and the story revolves around some characters who are charged with making a propaganda feel-good film.
That's right. I mean, I had at that point I'd written 2 roughly contemporary novels, and I was trying to think about what to write next. And I was thinking I would quite like to write about behind the scenes in television, but it did occur to me that this seemed terribly navel gazing. And although I had lots I wanted to say about working with actors and writers, that it was hard to see why anybody would care. And then I came across a quote by a actor who was really big between the wars, and he's now more or less been forgotten. And he's now been forgotten to the extent that I can't remember whether his first name is George or Leslie, but his second name is Arliss. And the quote was, he was writing about working in Hollywood, in fact. Once work begins in studio, nothing outside is of any relative importance. And I was thinking about that, and I had always been interested in the home front and had read a lot about it over the years. And it suddenly occurred to me, was work in studio, where you become so obsessed about small, unimportant, trivial details, was it still the same when there was actually something of vast importance happening outside, when bombs were actually dropping? And I started researching and found out that, even in the middle of the Blitz, it still took, 13 people to decide on the colour of the leading man's tie, that kind of obsessive triviality, where it seems like the most important thing in the world, carried on
regardless.
They were still shooting in London. And I thought, okay, I've got this, because actors and writers and the relationships between them have not really changed. And so I took that knowledge and used it in an era of which I've had an obsessive interest really since I was about 12. My dad got a book for Christmas when I was about 12 called How We Lived Then, which was a Norman Longmate put it together. It's a series, first-person reminiscences of the home front. And my elder sister bought it for my dad, in fact, and she was a sociology student at the time. And I remember my dad looking at it and saying, "Why would I want to read this? I lived through it."
Yeah, too recent. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. But I took it and read it and reread it. So when I came to write Their Finest Hour and a Half, I already had a sort of baseline of knowledge that I was able to build on. I didn't have to research from scratch.
No, it's a wonderful novel which has your trademarks of such a lot of humour, as well as a a kind of a really well-driven plot and great characters. How was it to then see that book transferred to the big screen? Quite strange to have a book about making a film then become a film itself.
Yes, absolutely. And I often think, you know, while I moaned occasionally when it was being done, you know, the fact that I'd written a whole book about the contrivances and shifts and shortcuts of and what you have to put up with making a film, I could hardly complain when the same things happened to me. But well, it was a very long process because it was bought for a film in 2009, and I don't think it was made until 2016, 2017. But they were very good to me. I wasn't asked to write it. I've never been asked to write anything that's been. I've never been asked to write any adaptation. But they were very nice to me and decent to me, and I really liked the writer. And they sent me every draft. And although it was a bit chastening to see initially, you know, characters being yanked out, I sort of pulled myself together a bit and realised how lucky I was, and I had a team who really cared about it. And I also realised how different film is to book. It has to be different. For a start, time constraints, but also because a lot of my books are based around internal monologues. We know what's going on inside characters' heads, and of course, that's the one thing you absolutely cannot do in a film. And the analogy I always use, ad nauseam probably, but a book is like a sort of river or rambling road. It takes you from one scene to another, but a film, which you can only observe, is like a series of hairpin bends. So whoa, you know, they fall, whoa, you know, and you have to put up with that. And and I was really lucky to get a team who really cared. And some
great actors as well.
Some great actors, and I was very proud it turned into one of those British films where every time a door opens, yet another great British character actor walks in, and it was it was very. I thought it looked wonderful, and they managed to get it looking shabby. And I loved the way that beautiful Gemma Arterton wore almost the same clothes all the way through, as she would, you know. And it was. I did go down to the studio, and the read through. I was so thrown by what was going on, I could hardly concentrate. It was very bizarre. And then I was an extra for one day, which was a couple of days.
Oh, were you?
Really oh yeah, it's weird. And that
what did you? Who did you play?
I was I was a makeup artist in the scene in which Bill Nye walks out, and you know, I had an overall and a wig and red lipstick, and I can't act at all, and I knew that certain amount of reaction was necessary because he walks out of the studio, and we all had to look a bit shocked. He walks past the group of us, including me, and I was so worried about overacting, you know, and ending up on YouTube with a big, you know, circle around me, look at this gurning extra, that I hardly move my face. I look like a sort of plank with lipstick, but it was hugely fun. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again now. Got that moment.
I've got a wonderful brown wig on, so I mean, not even my own family spotted me, so I really wouldn't, you know, look too hard.
Right, okay. So moving on then to the books that form a sort of a loose sort of trilogy. I'm just going to quickly just give a very quick summary, because some of our guests tonight may have read one, may have read two, may have read all of them, or have yet to discover the delights of this trilogy themselves. But basically, it began with Crooked Heart, didn't it? With an evacuee, Noel, losing his beloved guardian, Mattie, in sad circumstances, because she's a splendid character, you can tell. And he's then sent to St Albans, where he stays with Vera Sedge, a sort of a housewife, well, she doesn't have a husband anymore. And that's one of the problems, isn't it? She's got no money, so she has lots of scams and grifts to try and make money, and she gets Noel involved in those schemes. Then the next book that you wrote took up the story of Mattie, Noel's guardian, who died at the beginning of Crooked Heart, and that formed the story for Old Baggage, which really tells the story of Mattie from the point of some years after the main suffragette fight, which she'd been very embroiled in, and she's she's trying to really find a direction for the rest of her life in Old Baggage. And at the very end of the book, that's when Noel arrives on the scene. So it's a lovely, long, extended prequel, isn't it, to Crooked Heart?
That's right.
Yeah. And then brilliantly, V for Victory is your most recent novel for adults. And this takes up the story of Vera and Noel in the last stages of the war, when everybody is incredibly weary. They're living in London. Doodlebug attacks are frequent. Life is still a struggle. And it takes the story up to VE Day.
Yes.
So really just the end of the war. So what you've got really with the 3 books is this brilliant arc of a story, focusing on some, as Sean said, some really strong women from years when they were fighting to get the votes, through the interwar years when, despite the gains of the suffragette struggle, there was still an awful lot of power that women just didn't have. And then in the Second World War, you start to see how some things are changing, and I just find them really fascinating, and they're a perfect read in Women's History Month, I think, to really illuminate the fight that women had to get us to where we are now. So I'd like, if you don't mind, Lissa, would you mind just reading us a short extract from one of the books, maybe Old Baggage?
I could do a little bit from Old Baggage, actually.
Yes.
It's perhaps sort of 3 or 4 minutes. I've chosen the bit where Mattie is a former suffragette who still lives her life as if she's campaigning, basically, even though the campaign is over. And right at the beginning of the book, she gets her bag snatched on Hampstead Heath. And I'm going to read a bit where she's been asked to go to the police station, much against her will, to identify a thief in a lineup. And she doesn't get on well with the police. She doesn't like cooperating. And the scene starts when she's where I'm going to start reading is when she's been taken down to the basement of the police station where she's going to see an identity parade, and she's very disconcerted to be there. A long time since she's been in the police station. So I'm starting with Sergeant Beale. Through here, please. Yes, I'm coming. And yet she could not unglue her feet. Above her head, a bulb emitted a soupy yellow glow. It was the lack of window, she thought. One always needed a glimpse of sky, however grey, and a horizon on which to fix one's gaze. In her subterranean cell in Holloway, the weak electric light had made her feel purblind. Her prison dreams had not been of food or of home, but of shutters prized open, of daylight spilling in. She still couldn't abide a closed curtain. Is something the matter, Miss Simpkin? No, nothing at all. And as she spoke, she was already starting the process of gathering herself together again, tucking in weakness, trussing herself like a parcel, just as she had done twice daily on hearing the approaching rattle of the feeding trolley, the purposeful footsteps of the doctor and the wardresses. By the time her cell door had been opened, by the time she'd been pinned down, the core of her had been unassailable. I am quite ready, she said. On your feet, eyes ahead, shouted someone as she entered the narrow room. No more than a section of corridor, really. 10 or 12 men sitting on a long bench stood up and formed a loose line. Each held a square of cardboard bearing a number. They were all working men. Sawdust speckled the trousers of one. Another had ink smudges on his hands. Another smelled marvellously of horses. The youngest was a pimpled beanpole of 16 or so, the oldest a man in his 50s, with a soldier's bearing, a frayed collar, and a nose that he hadn't been born with. A soft, pale sausage of a nose conjured up by a surgeon to cover God knows what battlefield horror. He alone was disobeying the instruction to look straight ahead, his gaze flicking round the room. Briefly, his eyes met Mattie's, and they seemed to be relaying a bitter joke. What a farce, eh? Is it likely that a man who looks like me would commit a public crime? I'm ruined, but I'm not a fool. Are these men volunteers, or are they being paid? Asked Mattie, turning to the sergeant. Before he could speak, there was a cough from behind her that seemed to conceal the word neither. Or have they been coerced? I'll be obliged, madam, if you could continue to look along the line, said the sergeant evenly. I was merely inquiring, she said. This isn't the time or place to discuss the matter. Ah, familiar phrase. I have discovered over the years that there is never a correct time or place to question those in authority. As in Tennyson's Ulysses, the margin fades forever and forever when I move. Sergeant Beale's face remained expressionless, but a certain blotchiness was creeping up the skin of his neck. To repeat my request, can you continue to look along the line and see if there is anyone you recognise? Very well, if only to release these men from an unasked for, unrewarded and somewhat humiliating task. Atta girl, muttered the soldier. There was actually no need for further scrutiny on Mattie's part, since she had seen from the moment she'd entered the room that the person who robbed her was standing forth from the right. Nevertheless, she walked to the end of the row, pausing for a moment in front of number 12, a man with olive skin and a narrow moustache. Buongiorno, Signor Fazio, she said. Buongiorno, Signora. Sergeant Beale opened his mouth to speak. Signor Fazio delivers our laundry, said Mattie. I have only met him under strictly legal circumstances. Now, I think I've seen everything that I need to.
Very good. I think that gives us a real flavour of Mattie's character,
Yes.
doesn't it? The experiences she's had, which have not shaped her, because I think, you know, she's a very strong character from childhood right the way through. But yeah, the
yes, absolutely.
the difficulties as well that kind of character can bring as well.
Yes, absolutely. There is controversy always around Mattie. Yes. Yeah.
What drew you to write about the suffragette era?
I think when I started writing Crooked Heart, I'd been ploughing away trying to think of an idea, and then I came up with this idea of an odd mismatch between evacuee and foster mother. And I thought about that and eventually got the idea of an eccentrically educated young boy and this unsuccessful grifter. But I also wanted to make him without family, because it would increase the kind of spin of the plot, if you like. And so I had the idea of him being brought up by a guardian or a godmother, and then I started writing it. And I don't know, Mattie she was there. It was as if I was writing somebody who already existed. And although she dies fairly early on, I'm not giving anything away, she nevertheless infuses her character throughout the plot. And so when I finished the book, I thought I wanted to write a sequel. I always wanted to write a sequel because I'm so involved in my characters by the end. I want to carry on. But people kept on saying, Mattie, what about Mattie? Tell us more about Mattie. And I thought, oh, okay, I can start with a prequel. And I already knew a lot about her. And in fact, I had to write some Bible. Every single fact I put in Crooked Heart, I had to be accounted for, or at least had to exist in Old Baggage. And that was all fine. In fact, I made her a PhD, I'd made her a PhD in Crooked Heart, and that was really difficult to deal with, actually. I managed to work it at the end, but everything else seemed to fit, and I was able to, for instance, there's another suffragette who turns up in Crooked Heart called Aileen Gifford, who's a hopeless post-alcoholic. And it was lovely to be able to see her in earlier years. It was lovely to be able to bring people back, and by the time I got to the sequel, what was really nice is I could cherry pick who I wanted to bring back to the sequel, and that was really satisfying. You know, I knew them all so well by then. But yes, Mattie, I did love I wrote that book when I was, or at least it was published when I was 58, which was Mattie's age, and I wanted to write about middle-aged women who are largely invisible still in our society, and I wanted to write about a woman who would never be invisible, and yet who was nonetheless frustrated, as we all are sometimes, by her position in society.
And how people perceive women of that age.
Absolutely. And of course she is somebody with great blinkers on herself, so I counterpointed her with her companion the Flea, who is a woman of working class origin who has always had to hold down a job. And because Old Baggage is as much about class as it's about feminism. You know, money has always been so important.
And you see that, don't you? The character of Ida, who is the maid, in whom Mattie can see such potential. So she does her best to give her the tools that she might need to break out of those limitations.
But it's Ida who points out that money is the most important of these tools.
Yes.
One of
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yes, a lot came into it in the end. But it was I found, you know, Mattie's voice was there.
It was very compelling. Yes, I think that's what struck me when I read Crooked Heart, that Mattie's appearance at the beginning made such an impact, and then it was over too soon.
Yeah.
So I can see why you did that, but that must have been a really interesting technique to move backwards and have to account for things and then move forward. So quite tricky. Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
And then I like contrasting with Vera Sedge, who's the foster mother, and it's quite funny. You know, I sometimes do read my reviews and Amazon reviews and Goodreads. I know you're not supposed to, but I don't really mind. I mean, you know, I've got my own opinion in my books, and nobody else is going to shake what are my criticism or my delight in them. But what is quite interesting when you see people sum it up and say something like, Vera is a good, strong woman, you think,
well,
no, she really isn't. And I took great delight in writing Vera, whose grasp on you know, morals is very shaky. And,
I think with her, you see that there is a good heart beneath. But yes, every person is shades of grey, and I love that's another good aspect of your writing, that Mattie is this formidable character, but she herself encounters a moment where she must make a moral choice, and she makes the wrong one, and that wasn't what I was expecting. So it's what happens in real life, isn't it?
Yeah. We don't all behave as we
know. So with Vera, she is a complicated character, isn't she? She's this woman trying to look after her elderly mother. She's got a son who she worships and just doesn't see any bad in at all. And Noel comes along and she sees him as a money-making machine.
And I quite like that, and she doesn't really view Noel as a little boy till about halfway through the book, really. She doesn't really look at him. It's when she looks at him and realises he hasn't washed his hair for quite a long time, or, you know, I like that. She's also not very good at what she does. She's an unsuccessful grifter, and it takes Noel to make her into a successful grifter. I was quite pleased about that dynamic, you know.
It's a really lovely rounded kind of portrayal of this woman who, you know, you can really picture. I think what really struck me was that she has no husband. She's trying to make the money for the family. There's nobody else to support her. And really, it dawns on me just how difficult it was for women in that position without somebody to provide for them.
No benefit, no unemployment pay.
No benefit, no, and without the skills to support themselves, other than turn into sometimes some dodgy ground.
Forwards at one point, but he's dismissed through a row over some scarf which seems to have got into her bag.
But no, she's a tremendous character, and I really enjoyed seeing the progression as well in V for Victory, how life moves on for her, and how she gains some confidence, even though she knows that, without giving too much away, the situation that she's in with Noel in V for Victory is very perilous, because she's assumed another identity, which could be uncovered at any moment. The other character in V for Victory that I particularly liked was the character of Winnie. We first see Winnie in Old Baggage when she's one of the young girls who joins Mattie's club for young girls, the Amazons. And she's much put upon by her bossy sister.
Twin.
Twin.
I've got twins in virtually everything I write, so this is significant. I've got twins in Spencer's List, twins in Their Finest Hour and a Half. In fact, two sets of twins, acting twins and real twins. I've got triplets in Small Change for Stuart. I've got, anyway.
Is there a reason for that?
I think I've always been obsessed with twins. I was a bit of a lonely child and liked the idea of a twin. And also between Their Finest Hour and a Half and Crooked Heart, I actually adopted twins, so I have twin daughters. So so I chose, if you like, to have twins. So anyway,
I'm a mother of
Winnie and Avril are twins.
I'm a mother of twin daughters myself, so I understand how interesting that dynamic is. So yes, Winnie, by the time we meet her again in V for Victory, is actually an air raid warden, and in quite a senior position.
Yes.
So you can really see how World War II did finally give women that opportunity to move into positions of power. There's a lovely, really extended scene towards the end of V for Victory where there's been a catastrophic doodle bug that's fallen on a local pub, and some of Winnie's colleagues are trapped in the pub, and she is basically directing everything that happens around that disaster site with confidence, with calm, courage, and you can just see how impressive it is to other people that she's brought all those skills there.
I've wanted to write about wardens for a while, actually, because there's a warden in Crooked Heart, but he's a bad one.
It's a bad one.
And also V observes a female warden there who she rather cynically sees as the type who just enjoys shouting. And I had read a fair amount about wardens. Among the research I did for Crooked Heart was what I particularly liked reading were books written and published during the Second World War, and a lot was, especially first-hand accounts of the Blitz that were published a year or two later. And there's a couple of particularly good books, one called Post D by John Strachey, who was a warden, but also particularly a book called Raiders Overhead by a female warden called Barbara Nixon, who's an actress for the war, and she was a socialist, and she worked in a heavily bombed area just north of Euston. And a lot of what wardens did was, certainly before the Blitz and in the what they call the innovating lull between the beginning and end of the war, was both boring and unappreciated. And I wanted to show what they did, and especially towards the end of the war when a lot of wardens had been stood down, so there weren't nearly as many, and wardens basically organised what was going on during a major incident. But also there were lots of details, like the fact that Winnie does this, but many wardens did this. They would have the census cards for the neighbourhood, which then constantly update. This family's moved out of London. This family's, they got a soldier staying with them. This family's got a grandma, and it meant that people wouldn't be digging idly in the rubble. No. For a family that didn't live there anymore. And this kind of, they also sort of only stand and wait. I always think that people in, there are plenty of people in ostensibly boring jobs who are doing essential things. And I wanted to give the warden the spotlight for once in what was essentially a deeply unglamorous job. And so I got her directing the whole incident. It really is directing. It's like directing a massive show. Where is a crane needed? Which hospital are you sending people to? Where should you put the mobile canteen? Where will you get a phone line? And all of this. And yes, she's a senior warden, so it's instinctive, but it was still really interesting.
A life and death situation with a woman, directing.
And so I was really, and yes, she's somebody who at the start of the war is she's a failed actress. She gets married after a whirlwind romance, and then her husband is taken to prisoner of war at Dunkirk. So over the 6 years of the war, she has become somebody else. And she's wondering what she is going to do after the war, and I think a lot of women wonder.
It's a terrific third book in the series, and I should just say it's out in paperback, I think in June. V for Victory, isn't it? And I'm sure I don't need to tell our audience that all of Lissa's books are available to borrow through Shropshire Libraries, and we have most of them, I think, available through our e-library as well. And we're blessed with lots of independent booksellers in Shropshire, right from Bookshop in Whitchurch, Booker Bookshop in Oswestry, Penguin Books in Shrewsbury, Castle Books in Ludlow, Burway Books in Church Stretton. There's plenty to take your pick from. So please, I'd really recommend that if you haven't read any of them, then get hold of a copy. So we're going to be turning to questions from the audience in a moment. So if people do have questions for you, now's the time to be popping them in the chat.
Always happy to talk about Father Ted.
Yeah. But in the meantime, I want to just ask you a little bit about which authors inspire you or have inspired you.
Almost too many to say, really. I can't even say. It's ridiculous. I'm always asked this. I mean, I read very widely, and I read almost as much non-fiction as I read fiction. I think I'm inspired by all sorts of things. I'm inspired by first-hand accounts of incidents, but also any story that takes me away from life in whatever, by whatever means.
Yes. Yeah.
In terms of authors, I don't know. I'm reading quite a lot of the Dean Street Press Furrowed Middlebrow imprint at the moment, which is reissues of books written by female authors, largely female authors in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Right. And I think I do love a lot of those. Yeah, I do love Marjorie Sharp and Doris Langley Moore, a new favourite, Dorothy Whipple.
Dorothy Whipple.
I'm a huge fan of that. But I also, I'm being inadequate here. The last two books I've read were I read Doris Langley Moore, called Not at Home, which is a hilarious account of a woman forced to take in lodgers at the end of the war, hopefully enough, and Waterlog, which is Roger Deakins' book about swimming through Britain. So those are the two I've read.
Wonderful.
So, yeah. I don't know. I like to read widely because I think that's where I get my thoughts and ideas.
Yes. Yeah. Informs what you're doing.
Yeah.
We've got quite a few questions coming in. So I'm just going to start with. We'll try and get through as many as we can. Leslie Parr has said, "Hi, Lissa. Whenever I read your books, the characters feel instantly real to me. Every single one, every single time. Do they feel instantly real to you, or does it depend on each one? By the way, Buckley is my favourite of a wonderful bunch."
Oh, I love Buckley. Who in the book, he's a writer in Their Finest Hour and a Half, and in the book he's paunchy in his sort of 40s, slightly sharp-looking teeth. And in the film, he was played by Sam Claflin, who's completely ripped and in his 20s. Yes, most of them, the ones I like best, feel real to me. Occasionally I have problems. I remember Donald, the son in Crooked Heart, I had real difficulty writing. But it's getting the voice. Once I've got the voice, then I never know what any of my characters look like, but I know what's going on in their heads. So yes, utterly real. And my pleasure is when I've got the characters is putting them in different combinations. It's always nice when you think, Fee hasn't talked to Winnie, or Winnie, and I love moving them around because then the conversation will go in a completely different direction. Yeah.
Teresa Pierce says, "I bought Old Baggage on the strength of the cover. I have now read all of the trilogy, which I adore. How are covers decided? Who has the say over those?"
Well, ultimately the publishers have the say, but I've now just about got enough clout so if I say I hate this, they won't put it on. I didn't have that at first. It tends to be the publishers, and their criterion don't always appear to be my criterion, which is I would pick up this book. That's the only criterion I've ever got. Would I pick this up in a shop? But no, they seem to have. Ultimately it's the publishers. Yeah, but I'm lucky that I've got a lovely publisher, and they've now found Chris Wormell who did the covers for the trilogy, and they're just right. So
they are, aren't they? Yes, they have their own unique character. I think they do stand out. Yeah. Helen Whitehead says she loves the character of Mattie Simpkin, but she's left wanting more. Any plans to flesh out that backstory, particularly how she became involved, I suppose, as a young woman with the suffragettes and about her time in the suffragette movement? Do you feel like you've done her story?
I don't think I will. And going back beyond that would be very hard. It was hard going backwards anyway, but going back again and having to incorporate all the facts from two previous books would be very
challenge.
hard. I haven't. I think I've left these characters now, at least for the time being.
Mm.
But it's not without regret, you know.
No,
I miss them too. Yeah.
Lindsay Healy says, are you currently writing a novel? And if so, can you tell us anything about it? That's a good question.
I just finished a book for children, which I found so difficult to write during lockdown. I've written about a quarter of it when I finished V for Victory, and then I thought, oh, you know, I'll be able to get down and knock this off, and it was absolute agony. I hate working at home, hate it. Anyway, I finished that, and I suddenly came up with an idea for my next adult book last autumn, and I've been researching in a pathetically desultory way since then. All I will say is it's post-war. I can't say anything more, and I'm finding it's hard because I knew that last lot of characters so well, and it's hard to come up with you think, oh, but will I love them as much, you know?
Yeah. And I think you can tell as well that you'd had that love of that period, the home front period, for such a long time. And
it's not very post-war, so don't worry
it's
about
not
that.
Very okay. So it's still, is it austerity then? And
might be
okay. Oh, look forward to that then. Anna says, do you have a favourite among your characters, or is that like asking if you have a favourite child? Good question.
I've got lots of favourites. That's a good point. I do love Bee. God, I love Bee. She's so flawed. She's fantastic, and I love Bee's reactions are never quite what they should be, and I did love writing that. I like Buckley actually, as Leslie said. I'm very fond of him because that he almost wrote himself. I love writers banter, but I think my favourite of favourites is probably Ambrose, who's the actor in Their Finest Hour and a Half, because he's so vile. I mean, in the film, he's redeemed to a certain.
He's played by Bill Nighy, isn't he? In the film,
right, and you know, he ends up, you know, rather touchingly, you know, bringing Gemma Arterton back to life. That doesn't happen in the book at all. He remains a bastard right to the end. And I did enjoy writing. Ambrose is my revenge on every actor I ever worked with. So
all right, all rolled into one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Carol H says, can you tell us anything about what you're currently working on? So I guess that's we've covered that really a little bit.
I'm struggling with it at the moment. I just can't. I'm going back to the library week after next. I've booked my I belong to the London Library, it's the members library, and I've booked every day.
Oh,
so yeah. I want to get back into it.
Yeah. So you've missed the libraries being closed. Is that your normal work? Working space.
Yeah. I don't like, you know, commuting to my bedroom doesn't do it for me.
No. Jean from Ellesmere Library says, Lissa, thank you. I loved all the books. Are you going to write a sequel to VE Day? I'd love to know more about Noel and V. Have you ruled it out?
Day, but not currently. No, the difficulty is that because it ends where it ends, if I continued it, I would have to invent jeopardy. You know, the wartime had its own jeopardy, and the arc tied itself off, and I would have to push him off the diving board again. Yes. I don't know if I want to. I'm fond of the end of V for Victory, and I kind of want to leave it with a hopeful future.
Yes, yeah, I see that. Dianis says, how visually do you see your characters? Do you see your characters with hair colour, features, etc., or is that not important?
No, I don't see them at all. I'm not very good with faces anyway. I don't know. I never know what any of my characters look like. Very occasionally, I've actually described them. I don't often do it. And sometimes I base that description on people I know because that's the best way I can think of. But no, everything I know about them is inside their heads. I honestly don't know what Noel or Matty look like, even though I've got quite a detailed description of Matty, but I still don't see it. It's really weird, isn't it? But I think Buckley, weirdly enough, because I describe him so exactly, is about the only person I know what he really looks like. So it's odd, isn't it? I don't have that. I've got a very visual feel to it. I know I write filmically.
Well, yes. I mean, for me, Matty, I saw Stephanie Cole.
Oh, well, she was marvelous. Yeah, I work with her on radio, and she's so funny and great.
Such a brilliant character. To me, she was just that kind of very strident but heart of gold type of person. Yeah. Anne Duggan says, do you know whether there is any further development in the adaptation of Old Baggage? Is it being adapted?
Don't get me started. Not a happy situation at the moment, really. It's been bought for telly, but it's everything's delayed, and I sometimes kept more at arm's length than I would like. It can be very infantilizing being an author and with your books taken out, especially as I've been in telly, and especially as I, whether that makes me less of a catch because they're worried that I'm going to interfere too much, but it drives me absolutely mad. And not at the moment, no.
Oh, I can understand that, because it's your creation, isn't it? And it is, but I'm also
pretty pragmatic, I do understand the process, and all I ever want is for something that reflects the feel of the book, which I felt Their Finest did beautifully.
Yes.
Even though it was soppy at my book, and even though obviously loads of characters been slung out, I was still really proud of it,
We've got,
but Wed Wabbit, one of my kids' books, it looks like it may become an animation. So
and that's a brilliant book. It's so funny.
And
I think
it was my best comment. That's what I always want to hear most.
Yeah, I think those are real strengths to me. The humour, but also you must have you obviously have a fantastic vocabulary, which all writers do. But I just see a real delight in words in your books as well.
I've never forgotten the words I learned earlier. It's funny, I did some internet, how big's your vocabulary one. I think I broke the internet on that. So it's nice showing off in books, Katie.
Yeah. Oh, it's brilliant. Okay, I can just see one or two more. Teresa Pierce says, just a comment on twins. 35 years ago, when I took my daughter to nursery, there were identical twin boys there. She backed away from them. Later, as they were all putting coats on to go home, she said to me, "Mum, why doesn't that boy have a face of his own?" Oh dear. That's quite sad.
Well, I've got identical triplets in Small Change for Stuart and Big Change for Stuart that I absolutely love. April, May, and June. And
yes,
the first book they do appear identical. In the second book they separate out personality wise. So
We'll just time for one or two more. Helen Whitehead says, as a teacher of English, I wonder if one of your books could be included in the GCSE syllabus. And which would you choose and why?
Oh, that's a lovely thought. I think it would have to be Crooked Heart, actually, and I think that would, as it's got a boy at the centre. I mean, that was my gateway into adult books. When I was moving on to adult books, there wasn't any such thing as YA, and my gateway was books with children in them, things like The Go-Between and so forth. So a book with a child at the centre, I think would be great. Yeah, I'd love that. Crooked Heart. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, it'd be magnificent, wouldn't it? Just a couple of final quick ones. Carol says, my grandchildren love the Stuart books. Their dad, my son, is named Stuart. That's nice.
Great name.
And Leslie Parr says, I'd love a Wed Rabbit animation. Would Sarah McIntyre be involved?
Sarah McIntyre is the illustrator of the front covers of my children's books. I kind of doubt it, because it's a slightly different world. Red Rabbit's been bought by an animation company called Locksmith, which is a British high-end animation company, and who are bringing out their first feature in October. And nobody's been chosen yet, but it was quite funny. I did go and see them. They did the sort of they had a couple of weeks where they got people in to try and not storyboard, but try and picture it, to see what the characters would look like and so forth. And that was incredibly fun, going in and then showing me these ridiculous characters in it called the Wimbley Woos, and me saying, as usual, I've got no idea what the Wimbley Woos look like.
You're on your own.
It looks like. Anyway, so I love Sarah, and I'm constantly in touch with her about children's book covers, but that would be lovely. But I think it's a slightly different world. I don't think they overlap. Yeah.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our hour with you, so we'll have to start wrapping it up now. Very well. You've been talking for a long time, Lissa, and it's been so entertaining listening to just the many aspects that come into play in your writing. And you know, we are so grateful that you've given us an hour of your time
Oh, you're welcome.
to help Shropshire Libraries bring an author event to an audience. So, and I'm sure, and I do hope that people have enjoyed listening to you. I think Sioned's going to do the honours with a formal goodbye to people, and just one or two future events that she wants to draw attention to.
Yeah. I mean, on behalf of everyone at Shropshire Libraries, we'd obviously like to say a huge thank you to you, Lissa, for this evening's, for your time this evening. It really has been fascinating. I think we can all agree. It's been a really, really interesting evening. Thanks as well to everybody who's come and joined us this evening. It's great that while our libraries are closed, we can still get together, you know, be it virtually, but be united by our love for literature. So yeah, thank you all for coming this evening. Now, as Lissa mentioned, libraries are, fingers crossed, reopening on the 12th of April, all being well. But we do still plan to run some virtual author events kind of throughout the year, so that you can enjoy insightful talks like the one this evening from the comfort of your own home, you know, wearing your own slippers. And we do actually have another one coming up on the 22nd of April. So not too long before that is upon us, and that will be with Shropshire-based author Diana Rosie, who has written 2 really powerful historical fiction novels. So we will send you out the links to book onto our future events, and obviously we love a bit of feedback, so we will be sending out an evaluation form. So please do let us know how you found this evening. It really helps us when we're planning future events. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to Lissa, and I hope you have a good rest of the evening.
Thanks very much.
Yes.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Lissa. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.